So about 3 months ago now, I made a couple of videos about my new Canon C70, and I promised to talk about this little device if I ever got hold of it. This is Canon's EF to RF lens adapter with a built-in 0.71 times focal reducer. So that's what this video is about, and you'll find chapter links in the description so you can either watch the whole thing or jump to a specific section that interests you most. So let's get the basics out of the way first. This is a £530 or $600 lens adapter that enables you to connect an EF mount lens to an RF mount body, similar to adapters that Canon already have out there. The difference with this one, that instead of an empty space between the terminals, in the gap there's an optical element in the middle that takes all the light gathered by a lens designed for a full frame sensor and focuses it down onto a smaller sensor like the one found in the C70. You get a wider field of view, a shallower depth of field, and one extra stop of light when compared to the same lens attached with a basic adapter. In fact, that field of view and depth of field is very similar to that of a full frame camera. So what's the catch? Firstly, assuming it works at all with your EF lenses, and I'll come onto that in just a second, the autofocus detection area with this adapter attached is reduced to 60% of the frame. Now, I can't think of an obvious technical reason why this limitation is there, so please let me know in the comments if I'm wrong, but it appears to be just a software limitation. It is a little disappointing, but I'll talk a bit later on in this video about how big or small of a problem I think that really is. Second thing is, and I'm assuming most people interested in this device will know this already, but it won't work with EFS lenses designed for crop sensors. And it won't work with Canon's newer full-frame RF lenses. It only has the potential of working with full-frame EF lenses. Canon only claim that it's fully compatible with just 3 of their own EF zoom lenses: the 16-35 2.8 Gen 3, the 24-70 2.8 Gen 2, and the 24-105 f4 IS Gen 2. None of which I own. But I do own a few other prime lenses, including some third-party ones. So right out of the gate, this purchase for me was a bit of a gamble. Well, here I have 5 full-frame EF lenses: the Samyang 14mm 2.8 with autofocus, the Sigma 24mm art lens, Canon's own 35mm f2 lens with image stabilization, the Sigma art 50mm, and the Canon 85mm f1.4L with image stabilization. So let's go in order of focal length. First, the Samyang 14mm. The first thing you'll notice when you attach this lens is the camera gives you a warning that things might not work as expected. But optically, looks okay. The autofocus appears to be working as it should too. Face detection works. Object tracking works. The lens corrections, like peripheral illumination and chromatic aberration correction, are disabled, but that's not unusual with third-party lenses anyway. How about the Sigma 24mm art? Well, we get the same warning initially, but once again, everything seems to work fine, except for the lens corrections. Moving on to Canon's own 35mm f2, and yep, all fine there too. With this lens on the regular adapter, lens corrections are available, but with the focal reducer, they are again disabled, so we're starting to see a pattern here. The Sigma 50mm art lens brings the same story. A warning, but no real problems. And finally, the Canon 85 1.4L IS. You get the picture. They all work fine. I will add a note of caution though here, that if you own one of Tamron's Gen 2 lenses, for some reason, they've always been incompatible with Canon's EF mount cinema cameras anyway. So I suspect they might not work here too. Unfortunately, I don't have one to confirm it, but more generally, lens incompatibility with this adapter appears to be a bit of a non-issue as long as you aren't relying on in-camera lens corrections. So how about the autofocus? Well, my verdict on the autofocus with this adapter is that in terms of general performance, it behaves just the same as it does with the basic adapter. There's no additional hunting or hesitation. In fact, the extra stop of light it lets in actually does help to some degree. And in my previous tests, the C70's autofocus needs good light to perform at its best. As for that reduced area of sensitivity, it's not a problem at all. That 60% of the frame, to me at least, appears to be much more than the maths might suggest. I can still position a face in the rule of thirds, and face detection still works. And if I'm tracking something, I generally get nervous before it moves beyond the boundary of that 60% edge anyway. Now, obviously you might not feel the same way, but I'm very okay with it, and I didn't expect to be. I'm not a pixel peeper, so I'm not going to show test charts to reveal any microscopic drops in sharpness, but if I thought there was anything obviously nasty going on with this adapter, I'd mention it. But to my eyes, there isn't. It looks to be an excellent optic. Contrast, sharpness and colour all seem unaffected when compared to running the lens without the adapter in place. This might be the accessory that finally forces me to sell my terrific Sigma 18-35 f1.8 lens. This is a lens designed for a crop sensor camera. Its widest view is a full frame equivalent of around 27mm, and at the longer end it's around 52mm. But with this focal reducer and the regular adapter, I can carry just two prime lenses instead, the 24 1.4 and the 50 1.4, and get four full frame equivalent fields of view: 24, 36, 50 and 75, depending on which adapter I use, and all with a greater light gathering ability and an option for a shallower depth of field than the Sigma 18-35 can manage wide open. Now, for those of you that would like to see a comparison between the 18-35 lens and the 50mm with the focal reducer, I'll drop the C70 into this shot now. It's currently being filmed by the Panasonic GH5S. And first I'll use the 18-35 lens wide open at 35mm using the standard adapter. And then I'll switch over to the Sigma 50mm wide open using the focal reducer. I think that's a pretty nice upgrade. So are there any negatives? Well, I think there are two minor things that might bother you. Firstly, it's surprisingly weighty. I think compared to the standard adapter with no elements, I'd say it's probably feels about twice the weight. It's not too bad, but some people might find that a hindrance. Second point is that the camera reinterprets the f-stop and focal length of the lens to reflect its equivalence on a Super 35 sensor. As an example here, my Samyang 14mm 2.8 lens, when wide open on the C70 with the adapter, reads as 10mm f2. Now, I understand the reasons for Canon doing this, and it makes this particular combination sound awesome, which it is, by the way, but I think most people will find it confusing in general. See, when the focal reducer is attached, I prefer to think of my C70 in full frame terms because I get the same field of view as I do on my full frame R6 with the same lens. So in conclusion, as I mentioned at the start of this video, my picking up this adapter was potentially a bit of a gamble. And while it's taken a while to get hold of a copy, I will say that I think that gamble has paid off and the wait was well worth the while. I think it's awesome, and no one is paying me to say that. I'd recommend this little gem to any C70 owner with compatible EF lenses. I'd even recommend it over and above Canon's RF lenses, simply because Canon aren't making crop sensor lenses for the RF mount, and how else could you get a 14mm field of view with a light gathering equivalent of an f2 lens with autofocus on a crop sensor cinema camera like the C70? Genuinely, I'm really pleased that I picked up one of these. So if you found this video useful, please give it the old thumbs up, and please also consider subscribing. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching this video. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.